It was an ordinary Thursday morning, the kind of day that blended into countless others, gray and unremarkable. I shuffled to the kitchen in my pajamas, bleary-eyed, the faint smell of burnt toast lingering in the air. My parents were already bickering quietly over bills, their voices low but sharp enough to cut through the haze of my sleep. The golden ticket, however, sat folded in my palm like a fragile promise of something extraordinary. At first, I didn't believe it. My eyes darted back and forth between the numbers on the ticket and the winning combination flashing on my phone screen. The disbelief was a warm, almost terrifying thrill. I had actually done it. $620,000. Just like that, my life could change forever. The tension in the room vanished as my heart thudded loudly in my chest. For a few fleeting moments, it felt like magic. Like the universe had finally noticed me. But that magic didn't last long. I had barely finished celebrating when the shadow of my family's greed crept in. My parents' faces hardened, their smiles twisting into something that made my stomach churn. "You're going to give half of that to your sister," my mother said, her tone absolute, unyielding. My father nodded in agreement, as if my entire existence had only one acceptable purpose: to serve the family's favorite. "Half," I blurted, my voice sharp, incredulous. "I earned this? I bought the ticket with my own money." "You don't understand," my father said, his voice calm but cold. "Your sister deserves it. She's golden. She's perfect. She's done so much for this family. You should be grateful she's in your life." Grateful. The word rang in my ears like nails on a chalkboard. Grateful for what? For living under the shadow of a sister who never missed an opportunity to flaunt her achievements. Grateful for parents who measured love in favoritism, not in support. The betrayal was instantaneous, a punch to the gut sharper than any I had felt before. I looked at my sister, standing there with that flawless, smug smile plastered across her face. The same smile she wore at every family gathering, every school award ceremony, every meaningless trophy that meant nothing to me. I had thought family meant unconditional love. Apparently, it meant obedience. And then came the ultimatum: give half of my winnings to her, or leave. Simple. Absolute. My heart raced, a mixture of fury and heartbreak boiling inside me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay, to beg for understanding, to salvage what I could of this fractured family. But another voice, quieter but resolute, whispered something even more powerful: no. Never. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just left. I grabbed my coat, my wallet, the ticket that could no longer represent joy in this house of greed, and walked out. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the house itself was trying to pull me back, chain me to their version of family. As I closed the door behind me, a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration surged through me. I was leaving everything I had known. But for the first time, I felt alive, and somewhere deep down, a plan began to form. Not just to survive, but to reclaim my power in a world that had tried to take everything from me. The world outside felt endless, promising, and merciless. And I was ready to disappear. The city was a blur of lights and noise, a place where anonymity was as common as the concrete beneath my feet. I moved through it like a ghost, leaving behind the world that had demanded my obedience. Every street felt like a promise, every passing stranger a reminder that I could start again, completely unseen. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but, for the first time in my life, the uncertainty felt exhilarating rather than frightening. I rented a small apartment above a dusty bookstore in a neighborhood far from my hometown. The rent was modest, the walls thin, and the ceiling stubbornly leaky during storms, but it was mine. For the first night, I sat on the cold wooden floor with my lottery ticket pressed to my chest, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of life outside. My world had shrunk to this tiny space, and yet, paradoxically, it felt infinite. The first weeks were hard. Every decision felt monumental. What to buy, where to work, how to avoid attention. I found a modest job at a small tech firm, one that paid enough to cover rent and food, while allowing me to quietly invest the bulk of my winnings. The money that had caused my family so much greed now became my shield, my freedom, my silent declaration that I would no longer be controlled. Loneliness crept in, though subtle and insidious. Some nights, the silence of the apartment pressed against my chest, and I wondered if I had done the right thing. Could I truly erase years of family bonds with a single decision? I missed the familiarity, the sounds of home, even the arguing. But the memory of my parents' cold ultimatum burned stronger than any pang of nostalgia. I had left to reclaim myself, and I could not let sentimentality undo that. It was during these lonely nights that I met Mara, the barista at the corner cafe, where I escaped to think. She didn't pry, didn't ask questions, and somehow understood the weight of silence. One evening, over steaming cups of black coffee, she said something that pierced through the fog of my self-doubt. Life doesn't forgive you for waiting, but it rewards the patient. Make your moves wisely. Her words lingered, planting a seed of strategy I hadn't realized I needed. Survival was no longer enough. I had to plan, to prepare for what the future demanded. I began to watch, quietly, from the edges of my old life. Social media became a window into my family's petty triumphs and failures. I learned that my sister had secured a new promotion, flaunted a new car, and paraded her so-called success. My parents, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on gossip, oblivious to the fragility of the image they cherished. Each post, each photograph, was a thread in a web I could slowly manipulate. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the idea of revenge began to crystallize. Not impulsive, not petty, but clever, deliberate, and inescapable. My family's greed had taught me a lesson I would never forget. They valued power and appearances over love and loyalty. If they wanted a game, I would play, and I would win, silently, watching them crumble without ever touching a hand in anger. For the first time, I smiled. I had vanished, yes, but disappearance was only the beginning. The real journey, the one where I reclaimed my dignity and exposed the truth of their shallow devotion, was only just beginning. And this time, I would write the rules. From a distance, I watched my family's world unravel, piece by piece, like a carefully stacked tower of cards trembling in the slightest breeze. I had chosen invisibility, and in that shadow, I could see their flaws with clarity. They could never recognize themselves. My sister, once untouchable in her golden persona, was beginning to crack under the weight of her own arrogance and privilege. It started subtly. A small rumor spread in her workplace, nothing I orchestrated directly, only nudged into existence by a few anonymous emails. She laughed it off at first, confident in her polished exterior, but the laughter became strained. Confidence gave way to irritation, irritation to panic, and panic to mistakes. My parents, blinded by favoritism, only encouraged her, defending her errors as if she could do no wrong. The irony was delicious. Blindly, they were accelerating her fall. I remained careful, almost clinical, in my observations. Each social media post, each boastful update, revealed cracks in their armor. Their obsession with appearances became their weakness. I began planting tiny obstacles, anonymously tipping off creditors about overdue bills, letting small opportunities slip through my sister's fingers at crucial moments. She stumbled, faltered, and in her hubris, failed spectacularly without ever knowing why. Every slip was a small, sweet vindication, a reminder that greed, left unchecked, devours itself. And yet, even as satisfaction swelled inside me, there were nights I questioned myself. Revenge is a heady wine, intoxicating but perilous. Was I becoming the very thing I despised, manipulative, calculating, detached from compassion? The thought lingered, but I pushed it aside. My family had demanded my submission, and they had chosen to betray me first. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was justice, precise and deliberate. One evening, I watched her cry over an expensive investment gone wrong. She had ignored warnings, assumed her charm and her parents' influence would shield her, and now, alone in her failure, the golden facade melted. The messages from her colleagues were merciless. Her friends, once eager to bask in her reflected glory, began to drift away. My parents tried to intervene, but they were too late. The damage was self-inflicted, magnified by their blind indulgence. I realized then that revenge does not need to roar, sometimes it whispers. It creeps in slowly, imperceptibly, and by the time the target senses its presence, it's already complete. Watching them crumble without direct confrontation became its own form of art, a delicate tapestry woven from their mistakes, their greed, and my patient planning. Even in these moments of triumph, I remained distant. No calls, no messages, no interaction. I was a ghost haunting the edges of their reality. The money I had earned, the money they had tried to take from me, remained untouched, growing quietly, a symbol of freedom they could never comprehend. My sister's failures became a mirror, reflecting the truth my parents refused to see. Love is not transactional, And favoritism is a poison that consumes the giver as much as the receiver. As I poured myself a late, night cup of coffee, the city lights glowing through my window, I smiled. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. I had chosen the long, patient path. Theirs was a world built on illusions, and every illusion has a breaking point. Soon, very soon, the final pieces would fall into place. And when they did, I would no longer be the invisible spectator. I would be the one holding the last laugh. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, painting my apartment in muted gold. It felt fitting, a quiet, private victory that belonged entirely to me. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the storm that had already passed quietly in the lives I had left behind. My parents' home, once a fortress of authority over me, had begun to crumble under its own weight. Their golden child, the sister they idolized, was no longer untouchable. By now, the consequences of her arrogance were impossible to ignore. Projects failed, investments collapsed, friendships eroded, and the social circle that once elevated her had abandoned her in whispers and sidelong glances. My parents, blinded by pride, tried desperately to salvage their image, but their attempts were clumsy and transparent. Every effort to defend her only exposed the cracks further, like plaster peeling away from a weakened wall. I had chosen a careful path, avoiding direct confrontation. Revenge, I had learned, was most satisfying when it required no explanation, no justification. It was the silent watching as their carefully constructed world unraveled, the invisible hand guiding events just enough to ensure justice, not chaos. I had not touched a finger in anger. I had let their own flaws, nurtured by years of favoritism and entitlement, consume them. And it was exquisite. The realization struck me one afternoon, when a social media post caught my eye, my sister's friends posting messages of pity, parents of colleagues questioning her professionalism, neighbors whispering about her recent financial mishaps. The facade she had maintained for so long had finally collapsed. I allowed myself a small smile, a quiet exhale of triumph. My victory was not loud, it was precise, elegant, and permanent. And yet, there was more than satisfaction. There was relief, a deep and unwavering sense of freedom I had never known. I had vanished, yes, but in doing so, I had reclaimed something far more precious than money or social standing. I had reclaimed myself. The pain of their betrayal, the heartbreak of parental favoritism, had been transformed into strength. I no longer needed validation from those who had never valued me. That evening, I sat by my window, watching the city glow under the dimming sky. I thought of the path I had walked. The fear, the loneliness, the careful plotting. And I understood something vital. Revenge had been a tool, but liberation had been the reward. I was untethered now, no longer shackled to expectations or manipulated by conditional love. The lottery win, once a symbol of external fortune, had become the key to internal freedom. I allowed myself one final, indulgent thought of my parents and sister. Not of hatred, but of acknowledgement. They had taught me a lesson I could never have learned any other way. Their demands, their greed, their shallow obsession with appearances. They had inadvertently forged a version of me stronger, sharper, and unbreakable, and though I would never return to them, I felt no bitterness. Only clarity. With the quiet satisfaction of a storm past, I rose and poured a glass of wine. Tonight, I would celebrate, not just the winnings I had earned, not just the subtle revenge I had exacted, but the life I had created for myself. Free, untouchable, and entirely my own. In the end, the sweetest revenge is not the suffering of others. It is the absolute reclaiming of your own power. And for the first time in years, I felt whole.